How to put eye brackets in your puppet.
To the puppet nerds of the world, this may sound absurd, but this is the place you need to be. We'll do an interview and then we'll stitch and glue all of the dolls, we'll make it shake. If you wanna be in the know and to play like a pro, subscribe to Cruitinger Puppets.
Hello puppet nerds, Adam Cruitinger here and welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how to make eye brackets for your puppet. But before we get into it, let me tell you why eye brackets are important and what kind of eyes they are best for. First of all, not all puppets need eye brackets. If you look back at my original tutorial series, that puppet did not need eye brackets. Most eyes that have a flat back and are attached to the front of the puppet generally don't need a bracket. Those type of bigger heads tend to have enough surface area and support from the skull foam to hold the eyes on very securely. But there are some puppets that don't have that. Now I know you've seen me use eye brackets in a bunch of my old builds, but I thought it would be nice to have a dedicated video for it. You've seen me use eye brackets in the fried frog build, in the bacon pig puppet build, some of my Snoop videos, and most recently in the puppet that I built for Cameron. But I thought it'd be nice to have a dedicated video on just the eye brackets. Now with all those builds that I just mentioned, all those puppets had big round eyes on the top of the head. Now with round eyes on the top of the head like this, there's a lot less surface area to attach the round eye onto the head of the puppet. But luckily this puppet has an eye bracket so those eyes stay really still and aren't going anywhere. But with this little snoof here, I did not put eye brackets on him. I just screwed the eyes in from the bottom and each eye can kind of move independently, which is really not good for eye focus and for the longevity of your puppet. You can see really clearly that these eyes knock around like that and that these eyes stay together as one unit. Having an eye bracket on a puppet like that not only makes it better looking, but it also makes it easier to perform. So if I take this puppet and turn it inside out, you can see how I attach the eyes. You can see here that there's a single screw going into each eyeball right through the fabric. Whereas on this guy, if I turn him inside out, you can see that there's a nice little bracket in there that links the two eyes together. Now, before we get to making the bracket itself, I want to talk a little bit about the best eyes to use with this. A bracket isn't going to help you much if you are using ping pong balls for your puppet. The plastic is too thin, and when you screw through it, it's just going to break the ping pong ball. If you saw my no-sew build that I did a couple weeks ago, in that video, I used ping pong balls on top, and I just hot glued them. So if you are using full ping pong balls on top, I would definitely recommend that method, even though it's not the most professional. With the eye brackets, I like to use wooden balls like this. These ones are already painted white, and this is actually my favorite material to use for this style of eyes. They're solid wood, but I painted these ones white. These are sometimes called wooden knobs because there's one edge that's kind of flat and has a hole in it. Some places also call them doll heads. This is the most common size that I use too. These are 1.5 inch wide, but they also come in other sizes. Here are some 2-inch ball knobs. You can see they're a little bit smaller. And here are some 1-inch ball knobs. They're great for smaller eyes or just a smaller puppet. On a little side note, I like to do a special type of paint job on these type of eyes. Make sure to click this link if you want to see why it's important to not make your eyes pure white. Anyway, let's get back to making the brackets. For today, I'm going to make one for these 1.5 inch eyes. And I'm going to start off by making a simple pattern. So as you can see, each ball is about 1.5 inches wide. So what I'm going to do is line these up on the paper. So that means when I have two of them side by side, the length is now 3 inches. However, these balls have a perfectly centered hole on the bottom. So that way I know when these are flat, those two holes are exactly 1.5 inches apart. And I even have a clear ruler here to prove it. So I'm going to make one dot here, and then another dot 1.5 inches away. And I know that is going to be where I drill the holes into the bracket. Then I'm going to place these directly on top of those holes, and I want to draw a shape around them, just like this. It doesn't have to be perfect, I can clean it up after. Now I like to make my brackets a little bit wider. That keeps the eyes from flopping back and forth too. So even though the eyes can't flop side to side, they could still flop forward and back if that's too thin. So make the plate a little bit wider if you can. This is about 2 inches. I think I'm gonna go to about 1 3/4. And it looks like I went about 1 inch past the hole. So I'll do that on both sides. And then I like to round the corners and trace something, so I'm going to use this button. Then go ahead and cut out this pattern. And I like to punch out the holes too. And that's gonna be our pattern. Now there's a lot of things you could make this bracket out of. However, I don't really recommend using wood. You could use it, and I have used it in the past, but the problem with wood to me is it could crack a little bit easier. I like to use something a little bit more durable. One thing I have used is 1/8" aluminum rod like this. You can get this really easily and cheap at any hardware store. And sometimes I use it to make brackets like this on bigger puppets. This was one that I made. Another thing I like about working with aluminum is you can use most woodworking tools with it. Just make sure that you do have a metal cutting blade. And actually you can buy brackets from the hardware store too. These are some cheap brackets that I bought at the hardware store. Now you could use these for some puppets, however there's two little things about it that I don't really like. Number one, the holes are so close to the edge of the brackets. That gives it even less surface area for your hand, and as you can see there, the eye itself hangs off over the edge. I like to have the bracket fully covering the eye under the hole. The other thing is it's so narrow, it can have that problem of rocking forward and back on your hand, like I mentioned earlier. Look at the difference in thickness. Now for making these eye brackets, my favorite thing to use is PVC pipe. I know you can special order sheets of PVC pipe, but I haven't had as much luck with that. For some reason, everything that I order seems to be a little bit more brittle. And also, it's extremely handy that I can just get this at the hardware store whenever I need it. These are 4-inch pipes. These are the ones that I tend to use the most. And as you can see, I have two different kinds here. This white is schedule 40, so it's a little bit thicker here. And this green one is schedule 20, so it's about half the thickness. And the schedule 20 is my favorite. However, for a bigger puppet, I like to use the schedule 40, or if I happen to run out of the schedule 20, the schedule 40 will work fine in a pinch. Another thing that's nice about using the PVC pipe is sometimes you have a puppet with a curved head, and then you can just trace out this pattern on there like that, and then your eyes will be able to sit at a curve like that too. That's most handy if you're doing it on a puppet that has a large foam head, unlike the fried frog or the snoof that I use as the example. The other thing I love about this plastic too is that it's just so easy to work with. So I just cut a little slice off of it just like that. The next thing I'm going to do is cut a little slit down the middle. That way I can use the heat gun to flatten this out. Okay, now that I have that little slit in it, I'm going to use a heat gun to start softening up this plastic. Once it's soft, you should be able to stretch it out just like that. I like to press it down with a piece of wood or a flat piece of plastic or ruler. And you just hold it down for a while until it kind of cools off. It doesn't have to be completely cold, but as long as it's not hot to the touch, you should be good enough. And if you want to, you can also run it under cold water quick too. So now we have a nice thick, flat piece of plastic. And as you can see, we could make a whole bunch of these from this one piece. But what I'm going to do next is just trace this out just like this. Mark the drill holes. And all the way around it. And then I'm just going to cut this out right on the lines. Just like that. Next, I like to sand these edges. You don't want to have a sharp edge that's going to be on the back of your hand. So I like to round that out with sandpaper as much as I can. That looks pretty good. Next, I'm going to drill out these holes. Make sure that you use a drill bit that matches the diameter of the screw that you're going to use to attach the eye. Depending on the screws that you use, you might want to use a countersink too. Either way, it can help get rid of some of those burrs. And that's it. This is the perfect eye bracket for a puppet. Now let me show you how to install it. Of course, you'll need the eye bracket, you'll need your screws, a screwdriver that matches the head of your screws, and of course, your puppet. For example, today I'm just going to use this little snoof. First thing you want to do is decide exactly where you want your puppet's eyes to be, and then I like to mark it with a Sharpie. Then you can use an awl or carefully with an X-Acto blade, push in a little hole right on those dots so you know where to put your screws through. So now I'll turn the puppet inside out, and there are my 2 holes. So the next thing I'm going to do is put the screws into this bracket. Your screws might be a little bit loose in there. That's fine as long as the head doesn't pull through, because this also kind of acts as a washer. Sometimes they might be a little bit snug. If they're snug, like mine happened to be today, I'm just going to pre-screw those in. When they're snug, that kind of makes it the easiest to set this in, I think. So now I feed those screws through those 2 fabric holes, and then very carefully, do this part very carefully because of those screws sticking out, you're going to turn this back right side out. So now when you put your hand in, you're going to feel that plate on the back of your wrist. And if you carefully feel through the fur, you'll see those 2 screws sticking out. And now it's easy enough to stick the eye on. And now from the back end, I'm going to screw it into the wood. And there's the other. Now let me put these pupils back on so it's easier to see. And click here if you want to learn how to make pupils for your puppet. But anyway, now we have eyes on here that are super solid. They don't rock forward or back or side to side. And they're going to last a really long time. The other thing that can be nice about these, if you need to change the focus a little bit, you can actually usually pivot these eyes a little bit if for some reason you want to fix the focus a little bit or to make them look a little crazy-eyed for a shot or two. That's another little kind of nice little feature about this as well. So those were a few examples of some puppets I have lying around that have those eye brackets. Now this is just the way that I like to do it. It works really well for me, but if you have another way of doing it, I'd love to hear it down in the comments below. I'm sure there's other materials that'll be good for it too, like Kydex or something like that. But again, the PVC is just so strong, and best of all, I can get it pretty much anywhere locally. If you want to see more builds and learn the latest puppetry news, make sure to check out puppetnerd.com. There we have the latest updates of puppetry happenings and education. And if you enjoyed this video, I have hundreds of puppet building videos right here on this channel. Though if this is the first one you've seen, that's probably a weird place to start. And I have tons of free patterns on my website as well. So if you're a beginner to puppet building, that's a great place to start. And if you want to support the channel, I also have a couple paid patterns that go directly to creating this kind of content. But either way, the best way to support is to share and like this video. And there's a ton more builds coming, so make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. Anyway, we'll see you next time.